The cold concrete of the Chicago River was the last thing I felt before my lungs gave out. My best friend stole my identity, ruined my credit, and laughed while I drowned in her debt. But opening my eyes in my own bed 3 years earlier, that changed everything. The first breath I took felt like inhaling shattered glass. I shot up in bed, my hands frantically clutching my chest, expecting to feel the freezing, murky water of the river. Instead, my fingers tangled in the familiar, cheap cotton sheets of my old Wicker Park apartment. The air didn't smell like pollution and decay. It smelled of the cloying vanilla plug-in, air freshener I used to love. I was alive. Trembling, I reached for the nightstand and grabbed my phone. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second, before the numbers came into focus. Tuesday, the 12th of October 2021. I dropped the phone as if it burned me. I was back exactly 3 years before the sheer weight of Madison's deceit drove me to a bridge. Back before the $85,000 in defaulted personal loans, before the harassing calls from collections agencies at 3:00 a.m., and before the eviction notice from Mr. Henderson that left me sleeping in my Honda Civic in the dead of winter. I pressed my palms against my eyes, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. In my previous life, my downfall had been my blind, stupid loyalty. Madison Hayes and I had been best friends since freshman year at Northwestern. To me, she was the sister I never had. To her, I was a human shield. Here is how her scam had worked. Madison had a taste for Prada and VIP tables at River North clubs, but she worked as a receptionist at a mid-tier logistics firm. To fund her lifestyle, she took out massive, high-interest loans from predatory online lenders and forged my signature as the co-signer. But her true stroke of evil genius was the contact information. She listed my personal cell phone number, the one I had held since high school, as the primary contact for all her debts, and her own number as the secondary. In my past life, when the grace periods ended and the debts went into default, my phone rang incessantly. Terrified, confused, and manipulated by Madison's crocodile tears, she swore it was a mix-up, that her mother was sick, that she just needed a little time. I had answered those calls. I had taken the heat. I had even drained my savings to pay off the first $15,000 to stop them from suing us, believing I was saving my best friend. Once she realized I would act as her personal firewall, she doubled down, taking out even more loans until the house of cards collapsed entirely on my shoulders. I lowered my hands. The hysterical laughter faded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She relied on me, answering that phone. She relied on my panic. Not this time. I threw off the covers, dressed in record time, and grabbed my purse. I didn't bother with makeup. I had exactly 3 days before the first major loan, a $25,000 disaster from an aggressive lender called Apex. Financial defaulted, and the collection calls began. My first stop was the T-Mobile store on Milwaukee Avenue. "Hi," I told the representative, a young guy with a name tag that read Toby. "I need to open a brand new line. Completely new number, new account, detached from everything else." 30 minutes later, I walked out with a pristine new phone number. But I wasn't going to just throw my old SIM card away. Oh no. That old number was the bait. I walked a few blocks down to a Walgreens and bought a cheap $20 prepaid track phone. I slipped my old SIM card into the burner phone, effectively porting my old, compromised life onto a piece of plastic that belonged in the trash. I turned the ringer all the way off, disabled the vibrate function, and dropped it into the bottom of my bag. Let them call. Let the void answer. By the time I got back to the apartment, my pulse was steady. I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping a cup of black coffee when the front door swung open. "Harper, you won't believe the morning I've had." Madison breezed into the room, holding 2 iced oat milk lattes from Starbucks. She looked flawless, as always. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, and she was wearing a brand new camel coat that I knew for a fact cost nearly $1,000. $1,000 she didn't have. $1,000 I had unknowingly financed. "Hey, Mads," I said. My voice eerily calm, I accepted the latte she pushed across the counter. "Rough morning? The absolute worst." She sighed dramatically, hopping onto the bar stool next to mine. "My boss is being a nightmare about my hours. And honestly, I'm just so stressed about money lately. It's like, no matter how hard I work, I just can't catch a break, you know?" I looked at her, really looked at her. In my past life, my heart would have bled for her. I would have offered to spot her rent. Now, all I saw was a parasite practicing her script. She was laying the groundwork. Tomorrow, when my phone was supposed to start ringing off the hook, she would play the victim and beg me to cover for her. "That sounds terrible," I murmured, taking a sip of the coffee. It tasted like ash, but I forced a sympathetic smile. But things have a way of working themselves out. The truth always comes to light. "Exactly." She beamed, completely missing the double meaning. She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Harper. You're my rock. I'm your shield," I corrected silently. But I just stepped out of the way. Deep inside my purse, the screen of the cheap track phone lit up silently. An automated text message from Apex Financial. "Payment past due. Contacting primary number immediately." The show was about to begin. For the next 48 hours, I lived a masterclass in detached observation. I kept the cheap plastic track phone buried under a pile of winter sweaters in the bottom drawer of my dresser, checking it only when Madison was out of the apartment. By Wednesday evening, the screen was a battlefield of missed notifications. 47 missed calls, 22 voicemails, text messages ranging from polite reminders to aggressive, borderline illegal threats from Apex Financial, and a secondary, shadier entity called Horizon Capital. In my past life, every single one of those chimes would have sent a spike of pure, unadulterated adrenaline straight to my heart. I would have been hyperventilating on the bathroom floor, agonizing over how to scrape together the minimum payments to make the terror stop. Now, I simply cleared the notifications, smiled, and slid the phone back under a cashmere sweater. Because I wasn't answering, the collection agency's automated systems registered the primary contact as a dead end. And when debt collectors hit a brick wall with the primary number, they immediately pivot to the secondary. The shift happened on Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen, casually scrambling some eggs, when Madison emerged from her bedroom. She looked horrible. The flawlessly applied concealer couldn't hide the dark, bruised-looking bags under her eyes, and her usually bouncy blowout was tied into a severe, messy knot. She was clutching her sleek iPhone like it was a live grenade. "Morning," I said brightly, sliding the eggs onto a plate. "You look exhausted." "Bad night?" Madison flinched as her phone vibrated violently against the quartz countertop. She stared at the screen, her face draining of color, before aggressively swiping to decline the call. "Telemarketers," she muttered, her voice tight and defensive. "They've been calling non-stop since 6:00 a.m. It's infuriating." "Ugh, the worst," I agreed sympathetically, taking a bite of my breakfast. "You should just block the numbers." "I do. But they keep calling from different ones," she snapped, clearly fraying at the edges. She paced the length of the kitchen, casting suspicious glances at me. "Hey, by the way, I tried calling you yesterday afternoon to see if you wanted to grab lunch, but it went straight to a weird voicemail." Is your phone off? This was the moment. The pivot point where I completely severed her safety net. Oh, I completely forgot to tell you, I said, widening my eyes in feigned innocence. My phone completely died on Tuesday. The motherboard just fried. I had to go to the store and get a completely new account and a new number. The old one is gone for good. Madison stopped dead in her tracks. The silence in the kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. I watched the realization wash over her features in real time. If my old number was dead, she had no buffer. The creditors weren't harassing me. They were looking for her, the actual name on the loan, and I wasn't there to absorb the blow. You got a new number? She choked out, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the counter. Why didn't you port your old one over? The guy at the store said it was corrupted. I lied smoothly, picking up a pen and grabbing a sticky note. I jotted down my new clean number and slid it across the island toward her. Here's the new one. Make sure you delete the old one. It's completely deactivated. She stared at the yellow square of paper as if it were a death warrant. Before she could formulate a response, her phone began to buzz again. Another unknown number. She let out a frustrated noise that sounded dangerously close to a sob, grabbed her coat, and practically fled the apartment. I'm going to be late for work. The door slammed behind her. I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the edges of a genuine smile forming on my lips. But I knew the true chaos hadn't even begun. By Friday, the collectors at Apex Financial, having grown tired of Madison screening their calls, deployed their favorite pressure tactic: workplace harassment. I knew this because, in my previous life, they had done it to me, calling my marketing firm until I was nearly fired for disrupting the office. Now, they were targeting Madison's mid-tier logistics company. I took my lunch break near her office building in the Loop, sitting on a bench with a clear view of the revolving doors. At exactly 1:15 p.m., Madison burst through the glass doors, closely followed by Gregory Miller, her branch manager. Gregory was a notoriously strict, no-nonsense guy who despised personal drama, interfering with his bottom line. Even from across the street, I could read the aggressive posture. Gregory was pointing a thick finger at Madison, his face flushed. Madison was shrinking into her expensive camel coat, frantically shaking her head and waving her hands in a placating gesture. I couldn't hear the words, but the pantomime was crystal clear. Make the call stop, or you're done. She was drowning, and for the first time in my life, I didn't reach out to pull her from the water. I just sat on the bench, eating my turkey sandwich, watching the current pull her under. That weekend, I moved onto the offensive. Ignoring the burner phone was a temporary shield. I needed permanent armor. Saturday morning, while Madison was allegedly at the gym, though I knew she was actually having a frantic, hushed meeting with a high-interest payday lender in a desperate attempt to consolidate her debts, I sat at my laptop and initiated a complete lockdown of my financial life. I contacted Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. I placed hard security freezes on my social security number, making it impossible for anyone to open a new line of credit in my name. I didn't stop there. I pulled my comprehensive credit reports, seeing the fraudulent loans listed there: $25,000 from Apex, $15,000 from Horizon, and a slew of maxed-out retail credit cards still made my stomach churn, but this time it was a cold, calculated anger rather than blind panic. I printed every single page. I highlighted her secondary numbers, her email addresses that she had cleverly disguised to look like mine, and the IP addresses logged at the time of application. I was building a dossier. When Madison finally dragged herself back to the apartment on Saturday evening, she looked like a ghost. The panicked energy from Thursday had morphed into a hollow, dead-eyed exhaustion. "Hey!" I called out from the sofa, where I was casually flipping through a Vogue magazine. We still on for Chloe's birthday dinner tonight? Reservation is at 8:00 at Bavette's. Bavette's Bar and Boeuf was one of the most expensive steakhouses in Chicago. In my past life, Madison had insisted we go, ordered a $150 bottle of Cabernet, the dry-aged ribeye, and a tower of seafood. When the bill came, her cards had miraculously glitched, leaving me to cover the massive check with money I desperately needed for rent. It was the night my resentment had truly started to fester. Tonight, however, I was ready. Madison flinched at the mention of the restaurant. Oh, right. Chloe's thing. Honestly, Harper, I'm feeling really under the weather. I might just sit this one out. Nonsense, I chirped, tossing the magazine aside and standing up. I walked over and linked my arm through hers, giving her no room to escape. Chloe will be devastated if her best friends aren't there. Plus, a good steak and some wine will make you feel right as rain. My treat for the Uber there. Cornered by societal obligation and my cheerful insistence, she had no choice but to agree. The dinner was a spectacular disaster for her. Chloe, completely unaware of the financial sword dangling over Madison's head, kept suggesting expensive additions to our meal. Let's get the chilled seafood tower, Chloe cheered. And truffle frites. Every time the waiter approached, Madison visibly twitched. She barely touched her food, staring at her phone which she had placed face down on the heavy wooden table. Every few minutes, it would vibrate silently against the wood. Buzz. 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 The collectors didn't rest on weekends. When the waiter finally brought the leather checkbook, the total was astronomical. Nearly $800 for the four of us. Let's just split it evenly, Chloe suggested, pulling out her sleek metal Amex. I nodded, pulling out my debit card. Sounds good to me. We both looked at Madison. She laughed. A high, brittle sound that made a few heads turn at the adjacent tables. She rummaged through her designer clutch, her hands visibly shaking, and pulled out a gold Visa card. The waiter took the cards and disappeared. 5 minutes later, he returned, his posture slightly stiff. He placed Chloe's and my cards back on the table with our receipts. Then, he turned to Madison, his voice hushed in a practiced display of discretion. "I'm so sorry, miss," he murmured, handing her the gold Visa. "Your card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The table went dead silent. Chloe blinked in surprise. "Declined? Mads, did they put a fraud alert on your account?" "Yes." Madison jumped on the excuse, her face burning a violent, ugly shade of crimson. "Yes. I was traveling last week, and the bank is being ridiculous. Let me just..." She dug into her purse again, producing a different card. A basic Discover card. The waiter took it. 2 minutes later, he was back. "I apologize again, miss. That one is also declining." Madison looked like she might actually vomit. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading, transmitting the silent, desperate SOS she had used 100 times before. "Help me. Save me. Pay for me." I looked back at her, my expression carefully blank. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in the humiliation. I didn't reach for my wallet. I didn't offer a platitude. I just watched her. "I don't know what's happening," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes as the facade finally cracked in public. "Harper, could you maybe cover me? Just for tonight? I'll Venmo you immediately." I tilted my head, adopting a look of deep, sorrowful regret. "I wish I could, Mads, but I just moved all my liquid cash into a high-yield CD this morning. I literally only have enough in my checking account to cover my portion. I'm completely tapped out." It was a lie. Of course, my accounts were flush. But the look of absolute, unadulterated horror that crossed her face was worth more than every penny she had ever stolen from me. She was utterly trapped, with no firewall left to burn. The Uber ride back to Wicker Park that night was suffocating. Chloe had begrudgingly covered Madison's portion of the $800 bill, but the damage was irreversible. Chloe was a trust fund kid. Sure, but she despised being used. She hadn't said a word to Madison since signing the receipt, simply offering a tight, clipped goodbye before slipping into her own cab. Madison stared out the window into the damp Chicago night, her reflection in the glass looking hollow and terrified. I sat beside her, scrolling through Instagram, utterly unbothered. Sunday was a day of frantic, caged animal energy. Madison paced our small apartment, her phone permanently glued to her ear as she stepped out onto the fire escape to have hushed, screaming matches with God knows who. She was out of options. Her credit was shot, her bank accounts were overdrawn, and the collection agencies were threatening wage garnishment. She needed a miracle. Or, more accurately, she needed a victim. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, bitter chill. This was the day she would make her final move. I knew it in my bones. In my past life, this was the week. A massive, unexpected $40,000 personal loan from a company called Zenith Trust suddenly appeared on my credit report. It was the loan that had ultimately broken me, the one she took out entirely in my name, forging my signature and using my social security number to pay off her other defaulting debts. I was not going to let history repeat itself. I woke up at 7:00 a.m., dressed in my usual business, casual attire, and poured a cup of coffee. Madison was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly at her laptop. She looked up as I grabbed my keys and my tote bag. "Heading to the office?" she asked, her voice raspy, laced with a feigned, desperate casualness. "Yep." I smiled brightly. "Big marketing pitch at 9:00. I probably won't be back until late tonight. We have a team dinner downtown." "Good luck," she murmured, already turning her eyes back to the glowing screen. I walked out the front door and locked it loudly. Then I walked down a single flight of stairs, sat on the landing, and waited. I set a timer on my phone for 15 minutes. I knew her routine. She would wait just long enough to ensure I wasn't coming back for a forgotten umbrella or a tube of lipstick. When the timer hit 0, I quietly crept back up the stairs. I slid my key into the lock, turning it with agonizing slowness so the tumblers wouldn't click loudly. I pushed the door open just a fraction of an inch and slipped inside, moving like a ghost down the short hallway toward my bedroom. The door to my room was wide open. Madison was sitting at my desk. She had my small, fireproof lockbox sitting on my bed, the one I kept my passport, birth certificate, and social security card in. She had found the spare key I kept hidden in a potted plant. Her fingers were flying across her laptop keyboard, inputting data with the speed of a seasoned criminal. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms, and simply watched her for a full minute. She was breathing heavily, muttering to herself. Come on, approve it," she whispered, her finger hovering over the trackpad. She clicked the mouse with a sharp, forceful tap. I waited for the screen to load. I watched her shoulders tense, rising up toward her ears, and then I watched them completely collapse as a giant, red error message popped up on her screen. Application denied. Security freeze detected. Please contact TransUnion. Damn it, she hissed, slamming her fists down on the desk. Why? Why now? Because I froze it, Madison, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the apartment, it sounded like a gunshot. Madison spun around so fast, she knocked the desk chair into the wall. All the blood drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax figure. Her mouth opened and closed silently, her eyes darting from my face to the open lockbox, to her laptop screen, and back to me. "Harper, you're supposed to be at work," she stammered, her hands instinctively moving to close the laptop. "Don't touch it," I snapped, my tone dropping the friendly facade entirely. I walked into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the thick manila folder containing my printed credit reports, the IP logs, and the highlighted fraudulent accounts. I slammed it down on the desk right next to her laptop. "I took a personal day," I said, leaning over her, invading her space. "I needed the time to finish compiling my dossier for Detective Bennett at the 14th District CPD, for the massive identity theft and wire fraud case I'm about to file." She stared at the folder. She saw the bright yellow highlighter over the Apex Financial and Horizon Capital loans. She saw her own secondary phone number listed right beneath my forged signature. "Harper, please, let me explain," she choked out, tears instantly welling in her eyes. The crocodile tears were making an appearance, right on cue. "I was just trying to check your credit for you. I was worried because of that scammer. Calling you—" "Stop," I commanded. "Just stop. The performance is over. I know everything. I know about the $85,000 you took out using my name as a co-signer. I know you used my number as the primary contact, so I would take the harassment while you bought Prada bags and $1,000 coats. I was going to pay it back," she wailed, burying her face in her hands. "I just got in too deep, Harper. You have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you. We're best friends. Best friends don't bleed each other dry," I replied, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sorrow, just a cold, metallic sense of justice. By the way, my old phone didn't break. I put the SIM card in a burner and shoved it in a drawer. I listened to it ring for 4 days straight. I watched you panic when they bypassed me and went straight for you. I watched Gregory scream at you outside your office. Madison lifted her head, staring at me with absolute horror. The realization that she hadn't just been caught, but that she had been hunted, finally set in. "You knew?" she whispered. "You watched me suffer? I let you experience the exact nightmare you designed for me," I corrected. "Now, here is what is going to happen. You have exactly until 5:00 p.m. today to pack every single thing you own and get out of my apartment. You will sign this document." I pulled a drafted legal acknowledgement of debt from the folder, stating that you fraudulently obtained those loans and that I had zero knowledge or involvement. If you sign it and leave, I let the civil courts and the debt collectors tear you apart. If you refuse, I walk this folder into the precinct right now, and you go to prison for felony fraud. I have nowhere to go," she sobbed, panic making her voice pitch wildly. "My credit is ruined. They'll garnish my wages." "That sounds like a Madison problem," I said, stepping back and gesturing toward her bedroom. "Start packing. The clock is ticking." She broke, completely and utterly, but she signed the paper. She knew I had her dead to rights. By 4:30 p.m., she had hauled 3 massive suitcases down to the street, sobbing the entire time. She tried one last time to hug me, to beg for a reprieve, but I simply locked the deadbolt in her face. The silence that settled over the apartment was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Over the next 6 months, Madison's life unraveled exactly as it was supposed to. Gregory Miller fired her for the relentless harassment the collection agencies inflicted on the logistics firm. Without an income, she defaulted on everything,